Mickey always likes for everyone to identify themselves to begin with, so he will know as we go along.
Well, I may forget my name.
Well, and I ask you three to please appear together because I knew you all knew one another. You knew Oxford during the same period, the same generations. You have a lot of memories in common. And I want Maralyn just to take the lead and pose some questions and have all of you talk about whatever you would like to about your lives in Oxford, your families, your backgrounds, whatever you would like to talk about. Just please go forward.
Well, these are two of my very favorite people. I've known Preston forever, probably since you were a little boy. And Elsie, Dr. Pugh, is a newcomer friend. And when did we first meet us?
Let's see, it was probably when we first started working on that Burns project.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was
Work on
probably
that, too.
in the 90s, middle 90s.
I think so.
I really don't remember the
Right.
year. I never remember
I don't
years.
either, but it was when we first acquired the Burns Church, and she
Right.
was a part of the first little committee. that had
Yes.
four people from their church and four people from our community, and it worked out well.
Let me go.
Well-
Each one of you say your name. This way, if it turns out I'm not looking at this, somebody else is editing it, they'll know who you are. So just
Elsie
We
Pugh.
jumped the gun on it, didn't we? It was all right. I'm Maralyn Bullion.
okay.
Preston Taylor.
Now I will no longer interrupt you.
Well, go ahead with wherever you were going with that. I know a local trust organization was formed in 1996. I was there at the meeting. And I think probably the Belfry committee was already in progress.
Well, maybe since '95.
In that same period.
Well, excuse me.
But did you say your name?
Yes, I did
Okay,
already.
sorry. Oh,
Go ahead,
but
Elsie.
anyway, Elsie, tell us a little bit about your background. Have you been here forever?
Well, I grew up here in Oxford from the first grade through high school. I lived here in Oxford and went to the public school systems here, of course. But then after I graduated from high school, I went over to Atlanta to Clark College there in Atlanta for the 4 years there. After that, I went directly to work, and I worked 42 long years
That's a record.
in Chicago. And then during that time, just before I had planned to retire, my mother became ill. And my mother lived here all the time, all the years. She did move away for a brief period of time, but then before she moved away, in the 70s, I guess it was in the early 60s, she did move to Chicago for about 10 years. But before she moved, she always promised Mrs. Guyton that she would come back and take care of Dr. Guyton if he needed her to do so. So then in 61, she came back to take care of Dr. Guyton. And boy, we were so heartbroken, but it didn't make a difference. She had to keep her promise.
And what was your mother's full name?
Katie Mae Wilson.
Wilson. I think I remember the Wilson. And she was a very wonderful, wonderful woman. Everybody loved her.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So, and Preston, you grew up in Lafayette County forever, didn't you?
Oh, yes. For my parents and grandparents was always lived in Oxford and Lafayette County. And my father and my mother, they really taught us a lot because, see, grandparents was born in slavery. And so my father knew a lot because his mother was born just about 5 years after slavery. So they taught us a lot. And we was born and reared right here in the county, and then right on the west end of town, not too far from what you were speaking about a while ago. Okay, my father and mother was farmers, and he was a little carpenter, and they raised vegetable, fruit, you name it, we had it. And so it was just a blessing, you know. It's 7 of us in the family, 7 children. And so we was taught that we're going to have to get an education. So we would work hard in the field, and then when school started, we would like miss some days, but we always started school. And then on weekends, we would help them in the field. And we attended Oxford Training School back in the day, and I graduated in 1958. And after that, I went to Coahoma Junior College, and I'm from Clarksdale, Mississippi. And then after the junior college, I went to Mississippi Industrial College in Holly Springs, and I finished in 1964. Then I applied for a job in Quitman County, and I was accepted in Quitman County, and I was going to really work a year or two because I had planned to leave. But after going to Quitman County, I stayed 34 years. So I'm a former teacher, and I taught some courses from Coahoma Junior College, night classes, and I taught junior high history in Quitman County for 34 years.
That's a long time with education.
Right.
And well, when you were a little boy, where did you go to school? Was there a neighborhood, a community school that you come in? You didn't have to come into town, did you?
Right, when we was little, you know, back then they had little school at churches, and so like South Grove had a school, and we was really closer to South Grove than Oxford Training School. But that school didn't go in further than 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade. So after you finished the 7th or 8th grade, you would have to go to the high school in the city. If you live far enough out, like West Spring Hill had a high school, but we were too close in to Oxford Training School. They had a high school at Taylor's and also Abbeville and Liberty Hill. It was 4 high schools in the county. But
These were 4 black high schools.
4 black high schools. But see, we was living just out west of town, so we had to go to Oxford Training School.
Did you have buses? How'd you get there?
Well, we didn't have buses.
Well, I
at
didn't
that
think so. But how in the world did you get to school?
Well, we was right out west, so our shortcut was going to the university. We would come right up to the university and come across campus by the cafeteria and go on down and come out at the old depot and then on 5th Street and go on to school.
So very few of the young people went on to high school. Very few, I suppose, from the county. It was too hard to get into the town.
Well, they would come and, as you remember, they would rent rooms.
Yes.
And like Mrs. Davidson had, other people in the city would rent rooms to some of the students that live way out in the county.
Was your situation similar?
Not really, because in 1930, well, first and foremost, my mother and her first 3 children, lived with my grandmother shortly after I was born. And then my grandmother passed away in 35. And just months, we lived out on the farm where I live right now. My great-grandmother bought this 80-acre farm in the early 1900s. And by the way, my grandmother was a slave until she was 8 years old. Okay. This is what my mother has always told me. Okay, so we lived in her home until, let's see, she passed in August of 35. The house, her house, burned in December of 35. So at that time, my mother moved us to Oxford, the city limits, within the city limits. And so we rented all those years. Even when I finished high school, my mother was still renting. She was never able to purchase a home, but her dream was always, I've heard it as long as I can remember, oh, I hope one day I'll be able to build a house out on the home place. She
kept
called it home
She kept
place.
the land, she kept
She,
the property.
yes. Although before her mother passed, she said to my mother, whom she called baby, baby, I want you always to keep this place because you never know, your little children might someday want to come back here to live. And my mother always wanted to live there. And so after she came, I brought her with me to Chicago in April of '93, because she was ill and unable to live alone, because after Dr. Guyton passed, she lived alone here still in Oxford. And I had one brother who was living in South Bend at that time, but my two sisters and I all lived in Chicago. So when my mother became ill in early '93, February of '93, I came literally running to see about her. Yes, and as it turned out, I kept thinking, well, she'd been very, very blessed because she never had suffered any serious illnesses, and so I expected that at this time she'd just snap right back like she always did, but it didn't turn out that way, And so after I stayed 6 months, I had not retired from my job. So after 6 weeks, I asked her if she would come with me to the city and let me get the loose ends tied up, get retired, offload the house and things of that sort. And then after that time, we could both come back to, to Oxford. In the meantime, I had come down and met with a contractor who had started to build a home for us out on the home place, which is, it's like 10 miles west of Oxford.
Old Sardis
Old
Road.
Sardis Road, off of Old Sardis Road.
I know
Yes.
Old Sardis Road.
You know Old Sardis
Oh,
Road?
sure.
Oh, well, did you know Mrs. Connie Durham? She lived on County Road 125.
Nita Durham, that was on the board.
Nita and
Oh, I know Nita, sure.
Sammy and
Connie.
Yeah.
Connie, that's right. Those are her children. Well, at any rate, she was my next door neighbor. We lived on a little road called County Road 125, and she was my next door neighbor, which is, well, of course, there's quite I would say maybe about 3 blocks distance between the houses, our houses, but that gives you an idea as to where the home place was. So
she and I, we claimed kin to the same relatives over in Sardis.
oh, is that
I mean,
right?
not close kin, but
Yes.
close related to the
Yes.
Hayes family, who so much of their land is under that Sardis lake.
Yes, Mrs. Durham had to move because she told me she lived way down closer to where the lake is now, but she moved and bought just an acre, she said, there on County Road 125, you see. But as a result of having the dam built, my great-grandmother had bought 80 acres, but then the government needed exactly half of it, 40 acres. And of course, the right of eminent domain. We had absolutely no.
Story in this part of the world.
Pardon?
It's an old story in this part of the world. You don't ever have wanted to get my mother started.
On that
Lost a
subject.
lot of land in DeSoto County.
Yes. Oh, in DeSoto County?
Yeah, that's the Archibald land up there.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, at any rate, we came back to live December 21st, 93, just in time for that severe ice storm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
I've never spent such a miserable, almost week, but then we were blessed because some people were without any power.
Right.
Well, the house is all electric. Everything
Yeah.
is operated by electricity. We had
Oh, yeah.
absolutely nothing.
Not even a fireplace.
Well, we do have a fireplace, thankfully. That was our saving grace. Because if we, and a cousin of ours who lived up in the city limits kept asking Mother to please come and stay with her until we had some current, you know. But my mother, the independent individual that she always was, she would not accept the invitation. So it just happened that my daughter was home at the time, and she loves roughing it. She's wild about the out of doors. So she thought it was just so much fun to have to cook on the fireplace. I thought it was misery. Well, at any rate, long story short, we managed
No, of
through
course.
that
Well,
storm.
Hard to live pay, at least everybody
Yes.
did. Oh, both of y'all have got slave, can trace your ancestry back to slave.
Right,
Yes.
right, yes.
And it was your great,
It my father's mother and his grandparents. That's how I trace back. And also my mother could trace it back. They were third kids. That's where that little road out of the street is named after my mother's family.
I see, that was their surname.
Yeah,
right?
that's my mother's name.
but how did your people get to, they were in Virginia, weren't they? And
Right. They, as my father said, they was like Virginia and Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, and Baltimore, Maryland. They were sold down from like the upper South. They were sold down to the Mississippi, as he recalled, and they were out on the Taylor's plantation, and they were down at Taylor's, Mississippi, down just a little south of here. And as he recalled, and that's why our name was Pryor. That's what they traced it back to. We got our name from the Taylor's plantation,
I see.
and that's why that we are Taylors. And then after his father and his mother got married, they moved up closer to Oxford, just out now in the area that Belt Forward. That's where they moved up there, and they stayed there for a number of years. Right, and they always trace back, and so we got some history, some things that he told us, we recorded it.
he had one wonderful couple of parents. Your father lived to be 101 or 2?
105. Or 105.
That's a few years back.
Yes, that is.
And,
Absolutely.
worked hard all of his life.
All his
being
life.
kept you all fed and
Oh, yes.
that's amazing.
I mean, and my mother was a hard worker, and she could just cook, and she just loved cooking and raising gardens, and you name it. She was just, and when you drive into the house, the flowers she had in her garden were just beautiful, and the vegetables.
Yeah. Well, she had a lovely home, and you live in the family home now.
Right, we're in the family home, and that they built that home in 1956, and so they kept it up, and it's in good shape now.
Yes, it really is.
Nice.
Very nice.
It's just on the west end of town right here. At that particular time, we was out in the county, and the population of Oxford was about 2,000. And then as the city grew, they moved out, and now we right in the middle of the city.
That's right, and we were so much on the edge of things out there at that time, where we lived, which is just across from you
Right,
a little bit. There was no fire service provided by the university or the city, and the county didn't have any for starters. So if we had a fire, my daddy would gather up his students, and he had labs every afternoon teaching in a medical school. And they'd get out there and beat the fire out.
Oh, yes,
That's
yes.
what they did,
Yes,
because they
yes.
had no other option.
Right.
And you all didn't either at that time,
Oh,
if
no.
you had any troubles.
The
Absolutely.
houses were lost by fire back then. And you had 6 brothers and sisters.
Right, it's 7 of us. It's
Yeah,
I have
7
2
plus.
sisters and there's 5 boys, and we all you know we're still all 7 of us still here, and so we're done fine. They all have nice jobs, and they send all their children to school too. You know, Marvin's daughter, Rosemary, she's a PhD in psychology from the university.
Yeah.
And also Wise. She married a Wise, but Diane, my niece, she's a jurist down in Jackson, Mississippi, Jurist Wise.
Yes.
And her daughter went on lecture to Atlanta, and she got a degree in chemical engineering, but she decided she wanted to go to law school because her mother was had finished law school at Ole Miss, so she went back to law school and got a law degree, and so now she's the attorney for the Hinds County Board, a supervisor in Hinds County, and she married an attorney, and so my other niece married an attorney, so it's quite a few lawyers in our family.
That's
And a lawyer that
beautiful.
knows the chemical table.
I'll say.
Well, your parents insisted on education.
Oh, they insisted on, like I said, even if we had to go to the field on a Saturday or whatever, they insisted on education.
That's right.
Well, Preston, you're more fortunate than I. In our case, we can only trace our ancestors back to a maternal great-grandmother and a paternal great-grandfather.
You call back a little
And
later, okay?
all we
And
know
I'll
about
tomorrow.
how my
All right.
great-grandmother got to Mississippi is mother said that they brought her and others from some place, they don't even know the place, some place in Missouri.
Okay.
They don't know
Okay.
the town or anything, but she was brought here as a child from Missouri, and we don't know anything really about her parents, our
Okay.
great-grandmother. Now, our paternal great-grandfather, I've got a first cousin, you know Tom Buford.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
He is trying to do some research, and he has been able to find out that our paternal great-grandfather was brought here from Norfolk, Virginia, he thinks, yes. Of course, he's still in the process of trying to find out,
Right.
That must
yeah,
be
exactly.
terribly hard because no
It
records
is
exist.
no records, no
Yeah.
records. That records were not kept. I even had difficulty getting a birth certificate when
Okay.
I was ready to start work with the Board of Ed. I missed a whole year's salary because I had a problem getting a birth certificate from Jackson. Yeah, and so after all that time, they finally sent me something. But in the meantime, I got the idea that maybe I should contact the Census Bureau, and that record came
Giving you
first.
proof that way.
Yes, yes. So
would have been
record keeping
easier.
for black folks in Mississippi was almost
Very
nil.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
right, right,
yes.
Patricia Young spent hours and hours getting the records organized and separating the marriage records for the
Yes.
black community.
Yes,
Right,
Yes.
right. Sure.
yes.
She's
That was
done
a
a really-
labor of love for her. I mean, she just saw the need and she jumped in and did it. And Maralyn gave her a lot of help.
Yes, you did.
Yes, indeed.
It
Yes.
was true for
Well, we got
black
the,
people from the South, especially all over, in my experience, because I had a woman that helped me for years in Washington, and she couldn't get any satisfactory records, and somebody finally had the sense to go to the Census Bureau and just bypass the county government and everything else, and get. I mean, she was 65, and she was due to start drawing some benefits, and it just took a while to get over the problem. And get her there. It's the same kind of experience you're talking about.
Yes.
Only Belm didn't have the know-how that you have to
Well,
find the stuff.
yeah.
Basically was not literate.
Well, what Mississippi sent to the board was unacceptable to the board. So it was just it was just, yes, very, very fortunate that I remembered, the Census Bureau, and what they sent was acceptable.
That's
do you have a problem with your birth certificate or was it recorded?
Well, at that time, mine was recorded, but they had midwives, so it was like it's a different crowd, and so it's all depending on what they sent in. But I got it from Jackson. It didn't have too many a problem with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting to me that somebody think they came here from Missouri, because for someone to come from north of here in more or less the Midwest, rather than coming from north and east, which was the more typical pattern for everybody, was, I think, unusual for somebody to make a move from Missouri here.
Mm-hmm. Well, she was brought here,
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
I mean, even the people who brought her, why were they coming except availability of land, they thought. I mean, this was a developing area for a long time. To think that we are Old South, we're fooling ourselves. We are not Old South at all.
Yeah, so going back to civil education, see at the time back it wasn't a high school anywhere for black at that time. So my grandparents, my father's parents, they had some type of little school on it where Russ College is now, and for some way somehow they both wound up at that school, and that's where my grandmother met my grandfather. What they call Russ College.
Unusual to get that education back then.
Right, back then that was very, very unusual.
Absolutely.
And see, it wasn't a high school in the county, anywhere, and it wasn't hardly a good elementary school. It was just they would just go. So my parents and grandparents told us they would go just a few months or while they wasn't in the field, and the school like prior would go down, I guess, December, January, and February, and then when time comes to till the soil, the children had to drop out, and then they had to pick the cotton, so they'd be prior to November when they would get back in school. And even up to the 60s, in some parts of the state, I know Quitman County, Pinota County, they would have schools during the summer. They would start in July, no air conditioning, and they would go through August to the 1st of September, and then they would close school, and they would pick cotton until November. And that was down. But I'm trying to see if they didn't have it here in this kind of country.
They did that same type thing here, according to Tom Buford, his first cousin, because our grandfather reared Tom, my first cousin.
Okay.
Yes, because his mother had passed away. I understand she had some problem with her abdomen and received very poor care. They took her to the hospital in a wagon, which was the only mode of transportation that my grandfather had. And they operated on her at Bramlett Hospital, sent her back home, did not keep her the same day, did not keep her overnight even. And of course she passed away as a result of complications from that kind of health care.
Of course.
Yes. At any rate, he was left with my grandfather. Well, his mother had asked his grandfather to please rear him because she was certainly aware of the fact that she was yes. And he said that that's exactly what happened in his case, because our grandfather was on the farmed all of his life, and we have he's deceased now. We had an uncle who was in the services. This uncle would come and spend his time off there with the grandfather, and he would try to plan it so that it was either at the planting season or the gathering season, so that my grandfather could get finished early enough so that my first cousin, his grandson, would be able to get to school. And of course, the only elementary school that they had was at Buford Chapel Church. Very often, what passed as schools, elementary schools for black people, were just the kind of makeshift that the churches could provide. They were always housed in the black church, And with if you'd finished 12th grade, you could serve as a teacher
Right.
in any of those schools.
Right.
you
No, I
see.
think Susie
Yes.
Marshall,
That's
that's how she got
probably-
her start, isn't it?
I believe
And
that's
she-
right.
And then she got her
Right.
more
She,
education as she went along.
right. She'd go to Russ during the
So she
summers and that
started
kind of.
teaching right after
Yeah,
she came
right
to
after high school. You see, yes. And then when by the time we were in high school, well, first and foremost, when I started first grade, it was what was called the Rosenwald School.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It burned very shortly after I started to
The one
attend.
here,
Here in
the one
Oxford.
here.
Yes, here in Oxford. Yeah. Do you know you know where the middle school is now?
Oh, I
Yeah.
do.
Okay, well, it was in that area, very near
There's a
that.
marker there for it. Have you seen it?
Yes, yes,
Put
I.
that marker up some years ago.
Right.
Where the Rosenwald School was, because many people had never even heard of the Rosenwald School, and of course, such education as there was for black children was almost the direct responsibility of Rosenwald and the fellow that ran the
Washington.
yeah.
Who?
Booker, when it over at out of Tuskegee.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the man who was head of Tuskegee.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Not Walter Washington, I'm confused. I don't know why I can't call his name.
Yes, I know it. Washington, Booker Washington was
That's right.
responsible for
Yeah.
Tuskegee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Booker Washington.
Booker T. Washington.
Booker T. Washington.
Right.
Yeah, I have a couple of books on that whole story of him and Rosenthal, if you're ever interested
Oh, thank you.
in reading them. One is more interesting than the other, but they both are factual and accurate.
Right.
Excuse me. You all want some water or Coke or anything?
No, thank
No,
you.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Thank
I'm
you.
fine.
What about your church attendance, where you just had there were lots of black churches, weren't there?
Absolutely. It was lots of black churches, and I was out in the rural, so they wouldn't have churches like Sunday school every Sunday, but they would have church, the service, probably once or twice a month, because the minister would have different churches to go in and attend. But we would go to Sunday school at Salem United Methodist Church, and that was something we were going to do every Sunday. We would get up and go, and then on the third Sundays was our Sundays at 11 o'clock to have worship service, and we were always there. And even now, I'm still going to Salem United Methodist Church, and still been a member of that church all my life, and plan to continue. Member as long as I'm here, I'll be a
The only
member
church you've ever gone to, that's your church all your life.
all my life.
And where is it, Preston?
It's just on the hill as you're going west on Highway 6, belt forward. It's here. It's a road you turn and go up, right up that hill. And
Okay.
that's where it's located.
Across from the Ford.
A car from the forward.
Oh, I know exactly where you
Right.
where
So,
it is.
see that.
And where did you go as a child?
I grew up, my earliest church attendance that I remember was it was then Burns Methodist Episcopal Church,
Right.
which has,
Okay.
in the 60s, I believe it was, we became United Methodists, but it Burns, that's
It's
right.
the old Burns
The
church.
old Burns.
So we was
yeah,
Episcopal too.
Pardon?
We was Episcopal too
Right,
until they
all
merged.
were.
And-
Yeah, well, it's changed now to United Methodist. But we were at church 3 times every Sunday. Sunday school at 9:30 in the mornings, and of course that was followed by the 11 o'clock worship service. Then we were back again at 6 for Methodist Youth Fellowship, MYF, it was primarily for youngsters. And of course we had another formal 7 o'clock worship service on Sundays, every Sunday. And we could not miss a single Sunday. If we feigned illness or anything of the sort in order to keep from going to church, you knew automatically. You were confined to the house for the rest of the day.
Right.
You couldn't go anyplace else.
Right.
If you couldn't go to church, you could on
Absolutely.
Sundays. You couldn't go any place else for the whole day.
Well, the day was about gone, and where else were you gonna go? And I also heard over the years there was an awful lot of courting going on at that youth fellowship. So
Well, you know, maybe that's true, but the thing that I remember best about it was the kind of leadership and instruction that and direction that Miss Della Davidson gave us.
yes.
She was a member of that church, and of course, she was there every time the doors opened too. And that woman left an indelible impression on my life. She really did. So there might have been courting going on, but I had other things to think about.
Much of the social life was connected with the church.
With the
wasn't
church,
it?
that yes, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, that was basically the only kind of social institution that provided any kind of time or an opportunity for socializing for the black community. So the church was central, you know.
Right, it was
in the
central.
yes,
Right.
yes, in the lives of black.
Right, because even if we would go to different churches, in the South Grove Church, we used to go there a lot, and it was, and in West Spring he had a church, and Beverly. So we used to visit all the churches, but like you all was in the city, and so therefore y'all had service every Sunday. But some of
Every
the county churches, they would kind of put them in a charge. Like the elder charge, and so there probably were 2 or 3 churches in that charge, so there was one minister, and that's why they would have churches on
Right.
different Sundays, but they would have Sunday school at their church every Sunday.
And that, you had to be there for that.
Oh yeah, we had to be there for that.
Yeah.
What took you to Atlanta to college? How did you get over there?
Well, first and foremost, I thought at the time, a major in business administration. But you know, we didn't have any kind of guidance counseling, no kind of counseling. And I thought that was what I was interested in because I knew Mrs. Mabel McEwen. She was a black woman and co-owner of the funeral home.
Right.
And of course,
Yes,
she in my high school, there was no typing or anything. She let us come on her time to her home, and she taught us to type. Really, yeah. So I thought, oh, I would like to be a businesswoman, without ever knowing anything, you know, really about the intricacies and that you need a financial base and that kind. Well, at any rate, I went to Clark because they offered a major in business administration. Yeah,
And
right.
did you get the major? in
Yes, I
business?
did.
you?
I did. But after I got out in the workaday world, I found out I was not in a position to be in any kind of administration, business administration. I with no kind of financing. And
No, it's
so
hard.
what I did was to go, Northwestern University was right up the street from where I was working. So I went to Northwestern and took education courses. And you know, by the strangest coincidence, my senior year at Clark, my major professor said to me, now, you know, you need to take some education courses because you never know what you might want to do. I said, oh, Mr. Wright, I never planned to teach. Spent all my life teaching, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That
funny.
was my calling, I do believe, because I loved it, and I still do.
Well, that's what my mother told me, the same thing. She said, you need a teaching license just to put it in the bottom of your trunk. And someday you may want to fall back on it.
Yeah,
You
I
have
said
to
the
get a
sa-
job. So I didn't want to. I was kicking and screaming, but I took the bare essentials. And sure enough, I've used it in work.
Yes,
yes.
yes.
I tell my niece and nephew the same thing. I said, now be sure to get some educational courses. And I said, now, because you never know. And see, you're right. Some of
That's
them
right.
wind up teaching me, oh,
like
no,
an
no,
insurance
I don't want to
policy.
do it, but get some courses in education.
Yeah, yeah. And I tell you, that was my calling. I found out, that was my calling. Because
Where were you when integration, were you in Chicago?
I was in Chicago at the
Uh-huh.
time, yes. Yes,
Okay.
but of course my mother kept me posted about
I'm
what
sure
was
what
going
was going
on,
on
here, because she was here at the time.
Did you come down to visit? during
Well,
that?
we would always come down to visit on special days like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and always on Mother's Day. We'd come down for that.
Yeah,
For
sure
those.
it is.
And then in the early '80s, I think it was, Preston, they started to have the OTS reunions.
Yes, yes.
School reunions.
Yes,
Yeah, and we'd
absolutely.
always come down for that. It,
Oh,
you know,
I'm
it was
sure.
like a
Those were-
weekend,
yeah.
and we'd always stay with Mother. So we were aware of the atrocities that took place right here in Oxford,
Yeah,
and
because-
of course,
Well, you
even
had
other
something
places.
You had a comparison
Wow.
background. I mean, you living in Chicago, it was so, your situation was so different.
Well,
Here in-
it's different in that I did not live in this, but of course there's discrimination, prejudice, and all kinds of things to hinder the progress of black people. Black people are not by any stretch of the imagination free. We are not. Because although I'm thankful for the fact that things have improved,
Well, it's progress, but
it's progress, but it has
Ways
been
to
too
go.
slow and painful,
Yes, oh, sure.
and the mere fact that there is still so much of it is disconcerting.
Of course, sure.
And it continues. I mean, the headline in the local paper was about one of the voter ID requirements. And I thought, here we go again. This is one more item. You just chalk up. Let's stay on top of them. Let's don't let anybody have any wiggle room.
You're right. I thought, here we go again, too. I read that article in the Oxford Eagle
Right.
one day this past week, I believe it. What was one day this week or last
don't
week?
remember.
Well, it was recently enough that I remember it, and I thought, this is unbelievable. I cannot imagine the extremes to which people will go to hurt another person, and especially if that person happens to be black. I cannot imagine what goes on in the hearts and minds of people who can perpetrate this kind of thing on another human being. And then to have the audacity to blame those of us who are black for our plights in life. That to me is unthinkable.
What did you,
I agree.
I'm sorry.
No, that's nothing else.
No, I was just, you saw Intruder in the Dust, and
I did too. I
what'd you
saw
think
that.
about it?
Well, it's quite a long time since I saw that. And to tell the truth, I don't really remember the storyline,
Well,
the plot line. What was
The
it?
whole theme was that there was a black man being
Oh,
misjudged, and the white lawyer took
Right.
things over, but it showed the seamy side too. It was not just all this white
okay.
being kind and sweet and gentle, but it was. What did you think about it?
Oh, and children, that was, like I said, it's been so long, but as I remember, he was accused of killing, when it was a white man. Okay, and but he didn't do it. And see, it was a lady. It was an older white lady that really stood in the door to keep the mob out. I kind of remember that part. Right. And the mob was going to come in and just take him from the jail, and they knew that, and then they just put it there. So I remember that part of it.
Absolutely.
She was wonderful. I had an opportunity to meet her and take her to speak on campus.
Okay.
To pick her up as a teenager. Mother was involved in Oh, and all the women recognized her as soon as we started down the aisle and pulled the chapel, and they all just clapped and clapped because she played that role so convincing.
Yes, and see,
You had to think she was really there, holding them at the door.
hold 'em at the door. And see, that was at that time, you know, we was kind of out in the fields and all, but when was that? 1950 what? When the
52 maybe, was it?
52.
When it came
was a
out.
little
When that
early.
picture-
Intruding the dust.
I thought it was 48, but I frequently have something completely wrong. But I think it's so and so, and I realize, my heavens, Mr. Faulkner hadn't even written that yet. So
No,
I'm not sure, but in that period, certainly in that period.
It showed a family that was far ahead of their time.
Oh,
And
right.
accepting, you know, and being kind to this black man that was mischarged or accused of killing a man he did not kill.
yes, yes, yes.
He was able to prove him wrong and get him set free.
Right. Then you asked about the time that Jane married it. See, now you was in Chicago at that time.
Right.
But I was right out west, right off campus at that particular time. And if we remember, it was on a Sunday. It had been leading up to Jane Meredith coming, but they kind of slipped me in that Sunday. And then that afternoon, you see highway patrols, and you see traffic getting heavier, and then people running what's going on. And then at time you realize that you know, something really happened on campus that was going to take place on campus. And so that particular night, when the guns and the tear gas and all of that, because see, we could smell tear gas because see, like so we were living right across from campus, and so it wasn't in, you know, everybody was up trying to take care of their families, and they were calling around to see what everybody said, and it was just but that night, after all the tear gas and all the noise and all the everything, you know, and then the troops, the army, you know, they send the troops in, and they made it in just about daybreak, and they brought them down, you know, and then they were just jumping out of the helicopter, and that's the only thing that we believe that really saved this community, because they got here just about day, and then they was coming in on trucks from Memphis and all, and see, during that time, they were still coming from other cities. Now, lots of people here in the city of Oxford probably wasn't involved in all of that ride. You had people from different towns in Mississippi, and you had people from different states driving in, but it was a rough time during that time. But anyway, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine you would. It was very,
Right.
must have been a frightening time.
It was a frightening time.
Yes.
Very scary.
Frightening
So
time.
did you all pretty much stay at home and just kind of hunker down? Or?
Oh yes, just stay at home because see, it wasn't in school because see, not that morning
Yeah.
because everybody was afraid to even leave home. But see, school would scare you, but see, they know that wasn't going to happen. And then we understood that some of the people that were driving into Oxford, they wanted to do harm to the black because see, they was looking for the black community in this town. You see, black was living kind of all over, and they really they just couldn't figure out where we all lived. And that by that time the truth was here, and so they. But it was a rough time. But everybody was afraid,
Yes.
and you had to be afraid because you never know what was going.
Well, of course not.
Yeah,
Must have been afraid.
it was
Yeah.
a bad time.
Not to do anything.
I just had a long session with Bill Ross Brown, who's a longtime friend of mine, and of the local troops who had been federalized, Chucky Faulkner was in charge of the Oxford ones, and Bill Ross the Wardle Valley ones. But Chucky was had his arm broken early on, and well, somebody tossed something that Billy Rosby said didn't hurt him. But he really was in command of the local people,
Okay.
and was on campus in the middle of everything, all during the action. And he has a lot to
Oh yeah.
say about that, of course. the locals stayed encamped. I think he said for 21 days.
Okay.
Was when you were teaching in Marks, was it integrated when you began, or was it later?
No.
You went-
Oh, no,
there was
no,
an
no.
integration area over there.
Right, Ma was integrated around 1971, I believe, in the early 70s. And then at that particular time, in some of the Delta counties, they decided they didn't want to go to school with black. And after they was kind of forced to say, well, now you're going to integrate these schools, they built a school, a Delta Academy. And they put all their children out. Now the whole kind of equipment in the city of Marlin, little town, and the whole county, you probably had 4 or 5 white students that was kind of left, and then they didn't stay very long.
But did it go pretty smoothly once for the white children who came?
Oh yeah, for the game, but it was just a handful. It was just a handful. They built them a school and they put all their children out.
So it was not integrated.
No, it was
For all
not
practical
integrated.
purposes, it was
It was not. It was not integrated.
And I don't know that the public schools in Marks are that much different today. I don't know.
No, it's not. It's not. They're
Not the
not.
same.
They're not.
Do they still have all of those academies in Marks?
Right. Their academy is still in Marks.
Oh, okay.
And see, it's a school between Marks and Batesville. They call them. It's some type of academy, and that's open. It's a high school and elementary school. Oh, it's on number 6 highway between Marks and Batesville, really close to Batesville.
Oh.
This is a private school.
It's a private school, right? Private academy.
And some of the people here went over to that school.
Okay.
So you always had mixed races in your schools in Chicago?
To a very small extent also, because in Chicago, as everybody knows, housing is the thing that controls the complex of the schools, you know, because
Sure.
yes.
No cross-town busing like in some places.
Well,
DC.
right, because in Chicago you bus to the school, your neighborhood school, unless you have been selected to go to one of those charter schools.
Oh, yes.
Now, Chicago has a number of charter schools, and of course they are integrated. Their level of instruction, educational programs is better than the average public school, Chicago public school. Yes, and like I say, Chicago public schools composition is what it is basically because of the neighborhood. Because unless you are eligible, and this is, you know, you do this competitively, to go to one of the charter schools, you are expected to go to your neighborhood school.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And that limits the degree of integration because, you know, of the housing situation there.
True in all large cities. The same kind.
I'm sure it is.
New York, Philadelphia, United.
Any of the large cities, you have that same problem, you know. So I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea what the solution is to the problem.
I don't think there is one.
Unless and until there is a tremendous change for the better in the hearts of people, there's not going to be much of a change in the social programs that exist, you know.
That's discouragingly remote.
Pardon?
That's discouragingly remote.
Yes.
Yes, and I don't like to be so pessimistic, but well, from what my experiences have been, you know, I always say we are what we are because of what our experiences have made us to a very great extent. And
Unfortunately, so many of the little younger black children have not had a family background. They do
Right,
have-
right.
That is
Yeah,
true.
that's
And you know what? I dare not leave here without saying this. When I was growing up and attending OTS, Oxford Training School, there were teachers there who had our interest at heart.
Were their
Yes.
teachers white or black?
Black.
Black.
They were
There's
all
no
black.
teachers.
When
Miss
I, when I,
Foster,
when I
oh,
was in
yes, all black.
all of my school life here in Oxford, the school was all black. The teachers were all black. Yes. And those teachers, some of them, took a very real interest in us. I mentioned Della Davidson. I would mention Sidney Gladstone Gooden. Was
Oh,
he still
yeah.
principal there when you got
Right,
to
right.
Oxford? Yeah, because I graduated 100 years before you did.
And it's still
Preston.
there. And
Well, yeah,
Miss
I-
Foster.
I graduated in 47. 47. And he graduated, I think, in
58.
58.
Right.
Yeah, 11 whole years.
Well,
Yeah,
say,
before you came along. But yeah, it was all black, but we had good teachers, and like I say, teachers who were interested in you as a person,
Right.
who took a very special interest in you, especially if they thought that you had
Shows some
potential.
potential.
Right.
They
Yes,
saw that.
yes.
Furthermore, they weren't gonna monkey around with you either. They weren't gonna put up with it.
No nonsense teachers, you know. And then I was thinking about Preston mentioned the time when the kids from the county, when I was in high school, it was very common for kids from the Eder area, from the Buford Chapel area, and you're out your
Right.
way. Yes, and even from as far away as Waterford. You know, Waterford is there
Right.
near.
As well.
Yeah, we were coming along that way Sunday, my sister and I mentioned some classmates that I had from Waterford, and she said she wondered why they had come to OTS
Okay.
instead of going to Holly Springs. And I told her that the chances are it was a matter of economics. You know, it would have cost more if they had gone to MI had a boarding school, and Russ
Right,
College did
right,
too. I
right,
understand
right.
for high school people, because a first cousin of mine went to MI. Well, two of them, as a matter of fact, went to the boarding school, high school
High
at
school, that was it.
MI
MI,
College.
right.
That was the industrial school you went to?
Right, at the Mississippi Industrial College.
It was a boarding
Mrs.
school you
Right.
stayed.
Stayed on
High
And
campus.
that's that, those buildings that are falling down across. the
Right,
road.
right. And see,
Yes.
Russ claimed their property now.
Right.
And so they're going to try to save some of the buildings on their campus.
Well, they
So
looked
getting-
like they were. It was
Oh, they
really
was
good facility
historic
back then.
buildings, yeah. You're right. Well, getting back to the time that, you know, when teachers couldn't go to grad school, advanced degrees in the state of Mississippi. And after you finished with the just college, you know, you would have to go out of state to go to and get your master's degree. And so at that time, they were sending lots of people to Indiana University. You remember? And so the state figured out some way to kind of help pay for it, because see, you couldn't go to Mississippi State, you couldn't go to Ole Miss, and you couldn't attend any of the schools that and to get your advanced degree. And so they would kind of help someone go out of state, because when we was teaching, most of them just start off with just a BS degree or a BA, whatever. And then during the summer, we would go back, because I thought I was going to in a 10 or miss in the late 70s, and to go back to get your advanced degree. And so most teachers then were just teaching with a BS degree, and then in the years to come, you know, you had to advance yourself and you had to go on. And then they was going out of state, but after they started going to Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Southern, there was more black teachers getting their degree, because they get work done in the winter, done the school year, and they could attend during the summer. And so that was a step forward for the black
Yes.
teachers, and so
Right.
right now most of them have got the advanced degree. So,
We're almost up to today. Talked about what's going on in the system today. It's extremely changed, and what, are you optimistic about where we are?
yes, you just have to be, and I was looking at what you're saying. If I just said that things are going to change, and I have to be just looking forward, and I can just see progress. I just make myself see progress.
Well, the fact that you were elected alderman was pretty big progress.
Oh yes, yes, yes,
Well,
yes, yes.
well, when you were a little boy.
Absolutely,
That
progress.
is right.
Absolutely, I'm on the board and been there going on 12 years, and it's been a pleasure. It has been a pleasure.
Well, Preston, tell us a little bit about your going on the board. I think we'd like to know more about how you got involved and who helped you, and give us a little of the politics.
All right. Yes, after retiring, I moved back to Oxford, and some of the people said, well, what you going to do now? And they said, well, you should run for, can I get in politics? I said, no, 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 no. I'm not going to do that. And then people started coming in, and certain people had asked me, and then at that time, my pastor was Reverend Heron, out to Heron. And so he had been, he said, when I pressed, and he called me one morning. He said, Preston, I've been hearing about these, people been asking you to run. He said, now, I want you to run now. And since he was my mentor and I believed in him, I said, okay, I'll go get my papers, and I tried. So I got my papers, and we talked to some people, and so I filed, and then I had to get 50 names, before you file. So I got my name gathered together. So after that, I started kind of talking to people and campaigning, and I had quite a bit of help done that time. And so it was just the people in Oxford, it just seemed like that they were just ready for me to come on in. And Patricia Young, Brown Young, okay, now when she found out that I was going to run, and she was a very, very helping that, and Mrs. Bullion, I should be getting that. This lady here was very intimate and helping me. I mean, they would walk and knock on doors. I was in the heat, and you, I just have to just say, you and Patricia was just absolutely.
That was fun.
And so my father always said too, he said, well, I know they're gonna help you, because he was getting, that time. And my mother had passed, and I was just wish that she could have been here during that time to see this and see now. Miss Bullion's mother and my mother, they seemed like they were just.
They were good friends. They were not, not.
They were good friends. Absolutely.
She was not like someone working for mother. They were just. Mother had a little funny car of some kind. She and Collie James.
Oh, they were all
over the county. They
all
had
over.
a good time. Let's see. As far as mother was concerned, integration was no problem.
Yes, no problem. Well, politics have been, for the time I've been, it's been good. And the people of Oxford it's been a blessing to work with previous, and it been no problem. And so I work really, really with black and white. So it's been a pleasure. It really has. And the first, I won pretty good, but the second, I got 74% of the vote. And then the last time I ran, I was unopposed.
No problem at all.
Unopposed. So
let's see, were you who was the first black alderman? Was Mr. Howell?
Howell, right. That was the first.
You're
right.
the second one.
I'm the second black.
Well, this town has handled so many things, not as well as all of us might wish, but better, an awful lot better than so many other communities that make up this part of the world.
That you said Delta, aren't you glad you don't live in the
Oh,
Mississippi Delta?
Yes, I thank God every time I remember that, I tell you. Yeah, things are altogether different and better here now because you can use the library anytime you want.
Right.
I could not when I was growing up here. We could only go to the museum one day out of a year, and we had to be the only people there. Now I can go anytime I choose. And then the other thing that is such a tremendous improvement, when I finished high school, I didn't have any money. My mother, of course, didn't have any money. Nobody in the family had any money, and I could not go out to Ole Miss. It was not permissible. So I had to find someplace else to go. Now, there's no problem with having blacks. So things are getting better.
Much better.
Good deal.
Yes, 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 and I am altogether grateful for that.
Right.
I think
Well,
we all
y'all
are.
worked hard for it.
Right.
Yeah, I know that's
Through
right.
some bad times.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I would just like to say too, back in the late 60s, you know, my father, they had traveled up to East Orange and New York City, but they would always fly. And so it was back in the late 60s, and I said, well, we're gonna drive, because he wanted to see Richmond, Virginia, and Baltimore, Maryland, because see, that's what his people talked about so much. And so we was in a 1955 Chevrolet, no air condition, in July, and we went to Norfolk, and spent a couple of days. And then Ms. Bullion was living in D.C. at that particular time. And so my mother had called, and y'all had communication, and so we drove into D.C., and you met us, and we were gonna get to the hotel. And she said, "No, we gonna pay for the hotel." And said, "Y'all visiting here," and so this beautiful lady here, she went, got the hotel, they paid for it, and then she got in her car and the sights of D.C., and she was just and then her children, and the next morning she was back again. Well, we got to go see this, we got to go see that, and that was just truly a blessing. And my parents really enjoyed their
That
trip.
was a fun time. And you wouldn't have stayed in a hotel if our house had had air conditioning. We had, as you remember, we lived in those townhouses.
Yeah, and they were
And third floor was hot. My husband said, no way that they could sleep in this house and it's hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Across the river at
well, it was just
Roslyn.
Roslyn, yeah.
So-
Yes.
right. So that's what we say.
We had an old Volkswagen bus we brought back from Europe. So we all piled in that and we toured all over.
Yeah, that was a blessed trip. And see, then we went on up to East Orange, and so we stayed with some cousins. And then when they would carry us over in the city, you know, in Harlem and different places, and because that's not very far, you were just right there. And then back down, on the way back, we decided we were going to go back to Detroit for a little while. And so we did. And then from Detroit to Chicago, and then back home. So we just made the whole other.
Oh, it was a fantastic trip, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, travel must have been really hard back then when you couldn't stay at motels and restaurants and that sort of thing.
That is right, and couldn't use the washrooms
Oh,
along the
Right.
way,
That's
you
been
know.
really hard.
Yes, really hard, really very hard.
Yes.
But you know, I was just thinking while Preston and you were sharing, there have always been those beautiful people like you, even from the time we first got off the boat.
Yes, yeah.
You know, who
Well,
helped
that's-
us. Who helped us?
That's true.
And it
They
was
were not
because
all
of
bad,
people.
were they?
Yes, like you know, that we were able to get to today.
Right. And Mrs.
Because of
Young, I
people like you.
remember, and like I said, like your friend Mrs. Young, and she was.
Oh,
really,
yes.
yes, she was a beautiful
She
lady.
was.
You know, it's easy to do that when you've got people like you all in your families that you were trying to climb up. I mean,
Oh,
there
yeah,
was
we were
no
trying.
doubt about it. You didn't
Yes.
didn't want to stay where
Right.
you were.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
You knew there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes,
somewhere.
yes. My mother said, excuse me, go
No,
on.
I wouldn't say anything.
My mother said that her maternal grandfather, who her mother lived with during his, well, he lived with them during his later years. You know, he was elderly and unable to really care for himself. My mother said he would call the children together. My grandmother had 4 children altogether, my mother, of course, being the oldest. And he would call them together and say, listen, children, do right. Do the best you can about everything. And remember, there will be a better day.
Right.
And my mother went to her grave with that, remembering that, you know.
It was encouragement.
Yes,
All
yes,
the way along.
yes.
Well, I'm about talked out.
What about you, the other 2 of you? Do you have some other things you would like to say? Because we are free to go on however long we can go on and wish to.
You have 9 minutes.
Well, but he has plenty more film. When this one runs out, so I don't know. It strikes me too, though it hasn't been part of this conversation, of how much this struggle, economic and otherwise, has dominated the South and Mississippi in particular through its own decisions, many of which have been bad and have been very hard on the people living here, both black and white, to survive economically without the support that might have been with better leadership. I have been reading so much local history that I'm sort of steeped in it and come up with 2 or 3 impressions, that being one of them. Really despair at so much of what went on in our history, and at the same time hopefulness for how people have struggled to succeed and get ahead in spite of all the difficulties. And I see that pattern over and over again, and the striving for education. People moving into Oxford who had any choice about moving into Oxford, frequently that decision was based on coming here specifically so that their children could be educated. And that, of course, was not so much an option for black people initially, though it became that, but people who moved in decades and generations earlier, that was the attraction. That's what they were coming for. And that's continued to be a main focus of the development of this community. I don't think we would be what we are without that input. But that's the end of my sermon.
Yes,
That's a good
yes.
one.
Absolutely, that's right.
Well, I do appreciate you coming and taking the time, and as I said, we can go on for however long you can hold
I
out.
do have one question.
What's
That's
that?
okay. Did you say you taught in Marks? Is it where you taught?
That's correct.
So you lived in Oxford and every day you would drive to Marks, or did you live in?
No. Bought a house.
Oh, okay.
Still have it. That
That's
is
a-
Marks,
that's a-
right.
That would have been a trick.
That would have been a trip.
And you came home every weekend.
So,
Oh yes, must every weekend.
Oh,
After,
I
after.
mean,
had to come home to some of Mama's cooking.
Oh yes, after.
blacks and whites going to school together is one thing, but the idea of a black teaching a white, that must have been totally unthinkable at that time.
Absolutely.
At that time, right.
Absolutely.
And Marx was so much the focus. Curtis Wilkie, who has written a good deal about this and started his career with the Clarksville paper, covering things in Marx. And Curtis used to say, well, I had a front seat at the Civil Rights Revolution. It started here in Marx, Mississippi.
Yeah, the wagon train.
Yeah,
The wagon train. It
That's
started.
what he was talking about.
Right, and Dr. King was he visited Mark, I believe, about a few months before he was assassinated.
It was somebody here has done a piece of film on that. And you?
Oh, so you know about Mark and the wagon train? Oh yes.
And pictures
Okay.
of Dr. King there. You did all that?
Well, I did one. I don't know if that's the one you're talking about.
Well,
Well,
I'm
that's
not
a
sure,
small-
but I've
that's-
seen
Last year,
them.
my documentary project was Quitman County.
Well, if you
Oh,
all would like to
okay.
see his film, we'll just have another session.
Oh,
We could do that
okay.
How
sometime.
about that?
Okay.
Okay,
That's
I
wonderful.
don't know whether,
Yes,
well, we
indeed.
have to have a screen, but never mind. If we can make arrangements, we'll do it, if you all would enjoy seeing it. I think I would enjoy seeing it too. Well, you probably know more about Mark's and that environment than the rest of us.
Right, I could say, yes,
I
that's
know one
good.
thing, I fell in love with the people.
Oh,
They're just some of the most beautiful, sweetest people I ever met.
oh,
I mean, they're still deep in my heart. They're just wonderful.
wonderful.
You need to hear me talk. Let me say.